Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/TheOddCatlady. There's a girl who lives alone in the woods. Down a long dirt road, past a mile or so of forest, there's a girl that lives all by herself in a big house. All of her relatives have passed, leaving her a treasure trove of valuables and money that she keeps on the property. There's not even a dog to keep her safe from people who would take those things away. And when the wrong ears hear all those things, their eyes fill with dollar signs and they decide to make the trek. They always make the same wrong assumption though. That I'm really alone. 4 men came to my house a few nights ago. I saw one of them carrying a crowbar and another had a gun tucked into his pants. I only closed my curtains and locked my bedroom door. I've seen this happen many times and I can tell you exactly what came to pass, even if I wasn't a witness to all of it. They enter through the front door. They're always surprised to see it's unlocked, but they likely assume it's because I live so far out and am comfortable in the safety of seclusion. They split up in pairs, not worried about what they'll do if they find the owner of the house. She's just a girl, one who stares at the ground when she talks and who trips over her words in a rush to get them out. She's clearly not very bright and she's clearly not very strong. One of my monsters is hiding under the couch tonight. When he saw they were coming, he slipped under there. One of their ankles strayed too close and he's pulled under with not even a scream. In the morning the man will wake up in a country where he doesn't speak the language and with no memory of how he got there, only that there's a bite mark on his leg and that he'll never feel safe in the dark again. He is the lucky one. The monster under the bed is merciful. The monster in the closet is not. The one with him assumes that the missing man is pulling a prank. He calls his name and starts poking around for him. He asks the other 2, who are going through my grandmother's music boxes, where their friend went. They have no clue. They didn't see it happen. The searcher opens a pantry and out a clawed hand flies, wrapping around his throat and dragging him with. He screams, and screams, and screams until his throat is cut. In seconds all the skin is flayed from his body, landing next to his body in a pile of fleshy ribbons. Eyeballs are squished like grapes. Teeth fall from his jaws and to the ground with a sound not unlike dropping a handful of marbles. He isn't long in the world, but those remaining seconds are filled with some of the most excruciating pain a person could remotely comprehend. When the other 2 throw open the door, they find the whole pantry is soaked top to bottom with blood. The remains of their friend are unrecognizable as such, other than the scraps of his clothing and his crowbar. The 2 panic. They split up in their haste to escape. One runs into the backyard. His mistake. The monster outside the window lives out there, and he doesn't really interfere with trespassers unless someone bothers him. And when someone slams the back door open while screaming at the top of their lungs, well, that bothers him, as it would most people I think. I don't talk about the monster out there, only that once his target was in sight, the unlucky soul didn't have the benefit of a quick death. He was dragged into the shed and what happens in there I can't tell you. I just know that the man didn't expire until 3 nights later, and when that was happened he was begging for death. The last one, in a blind panic, ran up the stairs to my room. He threw himself against the door once, twice, 3 times before it gave. I screamed and ran to my corner, my heart thumping in my ears. The man got up and stared at me. Fear turned to realization that I was the girl in the house, and not only that, I was somehow responsible for the mutilation of his friend. He took out his gun and pointed it at my face, calling me a slew of horrible names. He stops when he looks at my eyes. Once blue, now one's turned green, The pupil is constricted to a pinpoint, the other one looks washed out compared to how bright the other is. He can't stop staring at my eye. The gun nearly slips from his hand until I catch it, firmly pressing his hand to the grip. He's starting to shake, sweat dripping down the side of his face. I stare at him until he turns that gun on himself, putting it in his mouth before pulling the trigger. Blood paints the ceiling as the body thuds to the ground. I don't know what things people see when they look into my green eye, but I doubt it's anything good. I go to bed after this, knowing the monster under the bed will clean up after tonight's debacle. Not the closet monster, he's always been a real dick about that. The monster outside the window isn't allowed in the house. He tracks mud everywhere and no one really likes his staring. It's good that he cleans though. Because I have to get back to work. I'm working on a book about thieves who think they can rob a girl who lives all alone, only to find out that she's not alone. And not only that, but that girl is the worst monster of them all. Because she created the three monsters that live in under the bed, in the closet, and outside the bedroom window. Second story. This story was shared by you/Verolven94. Creature on Back Road. If you read my first encounter, or whatever you want to call it, well, this all happened just about 7 kilometers down the road from that. A few years later I was out hunting with a friend when we lost legal light. So we hiked back to the truck and hit the road in his parents' new Ford half-ton, the ones with the sensors all over the vehicle. We had some music playing as we were just heading back towards town again, when the music started acting weird and cutting in and out with static, so me being in the passenger seat, disconnected the Bluetooth and reconnected the phone. Music cleared up and we continued down the road. We got up to the KM board on the road that my previous encounter took place and I mentioned, "Oh hey, that's the whistle block that we logged a couple years back." Half jokingly because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. My friend replied, "Griyayat, thanks for that," as I had told him the story before. We continued slowly driving down the road because it gets pretty rough in a couple spots and the road has a few sharp turns and an S-bend. Well, we go about a kilometer further and the music starts screeching and doing what we can only describe as alien noises. So I disconnect the Bluetooth again and my friend says, "Oh, Mom's got a cord in here." So he stops and gets the cord from me, I plug the phone in and play music again. Another kilometer down the road and the phone goes ape SHT. I mean loud alien squealing and sounds similar to that SHTTY dial-up internet noise from the 90s. We had started into the S-bend when this was happening and we shut the music off completely as we are driving still, making the one half of the S-turn and then we both look up from the music deck/screen and the headlight illuminate a figure standing in the middle of the road. So we swerve and take the ditch a bit, still going probably 30 kilometers per hour, and get the truck back up on the road. We continue coasting down the road as we are both in awe after just seeing a flash of this thing. I finally say after what seemed like 5 quiet minutes, "Man, did you just see?" My friend cuts me off and says, "Kin skeleton in the middle of the road." I say, "Yeah. Like a white rib cage, and a deer skull for a face." He finishes. I said, "Turn around, what the FCK was that? Does someone need our help?" Not thinking that we are in the middle of nowhere, with no vehicles around or any that we had passed from other hunters, it was early season and no one bow hunts here anyways. My friend said, "I'm not turning around, I feel sick. Like I'm going to throw up." And he continued driving. We didn't see another vehicle until we hit pavement again. It was taller than the pickup by easily a couple feet. I'm 6 feet 1 inch and my forehead is at the top of the window for reference. It has black surrounding the white of the bones with long arms half stretched to its sides as if it was saying, "Try and hit me." I watched this thing past the passenger window and stared up at it as we wailed by it, and it was definitely three-dimensional, tall with long arms and dark. Dead looking. Like light was sucked into it without reflecting anything. Hard to explain. When we hit service again, my friend received a text message from his mother saying, "What did you two idiots hit in my brand new truck?" I guess the new Ford send near accident reports to the owner when the sensors pick up something. I'm an old school Chevy guy, so I don't know, haha. The only thing I can find online that resembles what we both saw is a Wendigo without the antlers. Or the headlights didn't illuminate them anyway. Third story. This story was shared by you/Crazy Puma. Mimicry in the woods. They say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I sure as hell hope that isn't true with what I saw last year. I don't know what it was and I don't want to find out, but I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it. Before I get ahead of myself, I should probably fill you in on what's going on. Above all things, make sure to read my warning at the end. It could save your life if you aren't careful. My family and I are hunters, always have been. It wasn't forced on us as children, just something that the family was always interested in. My dad got me hunting when I was around 14 years old, and I've tried to go several times a year since I started going. We aren't your stereotypical, let's go kill some animals and be manly, hunters, but more the type of hunters that do it to be outdoors almost as much as it is about getting an animal. We butcher it all ourselves too, always using as much as possible out of the animal. My father had been looking for years to get some hunting land to call his own. Hell, he'd even started looking for land to buy before I could even hunt. He finally found an old home about 3 years ago with over 30 acres in southern Ohio, only 2 hours south from my parents' house. He got it for a steal, good land for hunting and a house that'll probably fall in soon, but it works well enough for now. It has good neighbors and can be a little loud from the road, but it isn't that big of a deal. I had decided to take a bunch of my buddies down there for a nice weekend away from town, and I thought I would get a decent couple of days of hunting in. We headed down on a semi-rainy night. I was trying to be spooky because we were headed to the middle of nowhere hills, Ohio. We got down there and it hadn't really rained at all that far south, so we decided to have a bit of a fire. I had a few drinks with everyone else and it was appropriately dark, but I still had something to do that night, so I grabbed another glass of whiskey, grabbed a rake, and a headlamp. My dad figured out the best way to get in the woods in the morning and make no noise at all: rake a path. It lets you get way into the woods and you don't make a noise. Now typically you want to do this a couple of days before you go hunting and not drunkenly the night before, because as you can imagine, it's loud as all hell. I don't sit too far into the woods, only far enough to go around the hill and not see the houses and road, so I figured I could get this done real fast and still be able to hang with my friends for a bit. I was sure the deer weren't going to care and they roam around at night anyway, and I was kind of drunk, so that didn't help the decision making at all. I carefully made my way out to my ground blind, following the ghost of a trail that was still left. I set my whiskey down, donned my headlamp and started raking. This is a different kind of raking than just normal leaves. For this you walk sideways and just pull a rake full of leaves and sticks towards you. After about 2 pulls of the rake, you just step over about 2 feet and pull twice again. It's a quick process, but it gets tiring very quickly. After about 100 feet, I turned off the headlamp as it wasn't really that useful as the moon was fairly bright that night. The old path was visible but harder to see with such a bright light. The soft moonlight made the old path more apparent. I finished the whiskey and put the glass in the pocket of my cargo pants. It sat uncomfortable and looked like a huge lump on my leg, but that's one less thing I had to worry about when I was done. I kept raking and raking without taking many breaks until I couldn't keep it up anymore. I finally stopped and rested for a second, about 60% done with the path when I heard something rather close. It just sounded like rustling leaves just across a little valley, maybe only 60 feet away or so. It isn't unusual to hear leaves rustling in the woods at all. I actually welcome the noise normally, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was weird about it. What wouldn't run away with that much noise being made in one spot from my raking? I know some woodland creatures are curious, but they aren't that stupid. Then it stopped about 3 seconds after I stopped raking. I ignored the incident and got back to raking a bit more. I was going to need to take more breaks. I was dripping sweat already and I wasn't close to the end of the trail yet. I got another 40 feet further and rested for a second, when I heard it again. Same noise as before, rustling leaves about 60 feet away that stopped about 3 seconds after I stopped raking. I was getting a little freaked out at this point. Reading too many scary stories and being in the woods late at night gets me on edge. I stopped and stepped on the trail I was raking and thought to look around for a bit to see if I could figure out what was out there. Something might have been following me from a distance and maybe I could make it out in the moonlight. I figured it was a fox or something. They are surprisingly loud in the woods. I turned around and stood dead still and looked across the little valley. There was something moving. My heart started pounding and I had to grab onto the tree that was next to me. It was a tall figure, standing maybe 7 feet high with long arms and long legs. I couldn't tell anything but his shape from the moonlight, and the fact that he stopped moving about 3 seconds after I stopped moving didn't help me see it. The figure was standing next to a tree just as still as me and not moving. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes and then just figured I was making it up. My brain likes to play tricks on me when I'm a little freaked out and I couldn't see anything in that direction anymore. I just took a deep breath and turned my back on that part of the woods and went back to raking. I went at raking with a new fervor, like a madman. I really didn't think there was anything really there following me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I imagine things so strongly sometimes that I swear I can almost see or hear them, and with a couple of shots of whiskey in my system, who the hell knows what happens. I just kept raking, more raking and raking, but I was so tired at that time that I really didn't know how slow I was going. I was getting closer to the house and could faintly hear the fire crackling and people talking, and that calmed me greatly until I realized that I could hear the loud rustling in the leaves at the same 60-foot distance, but still right across from me. It was following me. I could only get a few more rakefuls in before my nerves just couldn't keep it up. I heard a loud rustle, then the same rough rakefuls, and it stopped as well. I couldn't move from fear, frozen solid in my stance. I couldn't yell out to my friends if I wanted to. I tried. I took 4 steps onto the trail I was working on, tried to call out, and all I could muster was a weird grumble and mumble. I was in a bad spot and couldn't do anything. Then I heard 4 distinct footsteps and some grumbles in the same direction. All of a sudden I had a revelation: echoes. It was just echoes in the trees. It had happened before and I was sure it was happening again. It was always at the same time frame and I was in a valley. I had just made up the tall figure in the distance. My mind had just put the fictitious figure in the area where the echo had been coming from in my perspective. I sighed in a huge breath of relief and tried to calm down. I had been so worked up over nothing, just a noise in the woods from echoes. I decided to really calm myself down by proving it was echoes. All I had to do was toss a rock down to the bottom of the valley and count the bounces. Easy enough. There will be the same number of bounces after a couple of seconds, and then I could finally finish this path and get to relaxing. There aren't many rocks in this part of Ohio, but there was a couple around me, so they would suffice. I tossed it and counted 3 major bounces before it rolled to a stop. I stood there and waited until I finally heard a rock bouncing on leaves. I counted 4 bounces and no rolling. My blood froze. I tossed another one that I had in my hand to verify it, and this time my rock bounced 5 times, but the echo only produced a rolling noise and then a hit off a tree. I had no idea what to do as I stood rooted there in the ground. For some idiotic reason, I fished around in my pocket, pulled out the headlamp. It was already on somehow. I must have flipped it on somehow when fishing it out of my pocket. In a weird daze and some confusion of it being on, I shone it on the ground at my boots, my pants, and I glanced at my plaid shirt for a second before putting it on my head and looking across the valley. What I saw that night will chill me every time I step in those woods again. It was tall, not as tall as I thought it was last time, maybe only a couple of inches taller than myself. This thing was eerily familiar. It had weird brown lumps around its feet, a weird tan-colored set of legs with a large lump on one, and part of its torso was an odd mixture of cross stripes, but that only went up to about chest level. The rest was a weird gray-colored structure. Its chest and arms were pretty indistinguishable, the light washing out a lot of color and definition. Its face, though, that's what still haunts me to this day. Its head looked similar to a human head, but the proportions were all very mild. It has lumps where ears should be, a nose-looking lump, and depressions where the eyes should be, as well as a depression for the mouth. There were no holes in its head at all, though. It was also holding something with its long lanky fingers. It looked like a long stick with tons of little branches at the end. Behind the tall creature was a rough trail of dirt and leaves where it looked like it had been trying to rake a path. I turned my head and looked back at the hideous gray figure that had tried to actually mimic me in every way, and about 3 seconds after I did, it turned its mostly featureless head directly at me. It was at that moment I could finally move, and I fucking ran, the rake banging around my feet. I didn't hear anything in the woods after that. It didn't follow like it had before. I shot out of the woods like a bullet and ran towards my friends. They all jumped when I came hauling ass out of the woods. They were just telling ghost stories by the fire. They immediately knew something was wrong and started asking, but I couldn't tell them. I just mumbled and tried to sit down in a chair. I stole someone's cup of alcohol and downed it. I don't even remember what it was, but it was gone and it burned going down, and that felt amazing. I sat there for a few minutes and regained my composure. They tried to get me to tell them what happened, but since I wouldn't tell them and I said everything was alright, they continued with their ghost stories. I went inside and passed out half an hour later. Everything for the remainder of the trip was fine until the last day. I still went out to hunt, but made sure to not go out when it was too dark, in fear that the figure would show up and try to imitate me again. I didn't know what it wanted or what it was trying to do, but I didn't care and didn't want to ask it. On Sunday I headed back to the house, but it had gotten later than what I was expecting and it was getting dark, fast. I headed out a little faster than normal, trying not to get my hunting clothes too sweaty, but I was not sticking around those woods. On my way out I could hear a figure rustling around in the woods a little distance off to my side. I heard it and just started talking and stepping on loud leaves. I didn't want to see it or hear it or anything. I just wanted to get the fuck out of those woods as fast as possible and go the fuck home. I got out of the woods and finally stopped and listened close. I heard something in the distance rustling around and murmuring to itself in nonsensical tones. It was getting further away, and I listened until I couldn't hear anything else. I still go hunting there and haven't heard much since, but I will never forget what I heard or saw. I kept an eye out on local news for that area and wooded mountainous areas, and not a lot happened in the ways of mysterious sounds or figures until last week. Plenty of people go missing in the woods each year and are never heard from or seen again, but this news story last week really caught my eye. A girl was walking with some friends near dusk and they kept hearing noises in the distance, but eventually they didn't hear it anymore until a blood-curdling scream came from over the hill, and then an odd toned scream as well just after that. They all ran out of the woods as fast as they could and called the police. Another person from that area went missing that night and hasn't been seen since. The worst part of it is that this happened in New York, nowhere near where I am. I'm not sure if it moves that fast or if there's more of these things in the woods, but you have to be careful. Don't go into the woods alone, don't do it near or at dark, and if you hear a noise in the distance that seems to be following you for any period of time, run. Fourth story. This story was shared. The Wendigo Stalks. I wanted to share a story I created with an already existing monster with you guys. I think it's pretty good, but feedback is welcome. Friday, March 13th, 2020. I've been encouraged by my therapist to keep a daily journal as a relief for stress. It's almost like him telling me monsters aren't real for the 500th time wasn't working, go figure. He said that by writing down what I've been experiencing I'll somehow subconsciously realize that it's not worth worrying about. I think it's a load of bull, but whatever. Doesn't hurt to try. Every night I've been having the same dream for about a year now. Except it changes one small bit every day. I'm in a cold forest, the darkness is so absolute that it has to be the middle of the night. I'm not exactly sure where in the world I am, but I can hear water nearby. The dream always starts with my waking up in some dry leaves. I look around for a few seconds before standing up. As soon as I take a step, the leaves make a loud crunching noise. This is followed by a blood-curdling wail from about 100 meters away. At first that's where the dream ended. But every day it's been getting a bit longer. About 9 months ago the first major change occurred. A few seconds after the screech I instinctively take a step back when I catch a glimpse of two white shining pinpricks that seem to illuminate the forest immediately in front of them, as well as part of the head of the creature to which these eyes belong. It has a muzzle soaked with a red substance which I can only guess is blood. The second I see the pinpricks as well as what small portion of the creature they illuminate, I become frozen with fear. What I've learned is that every day the creature gets one step closer before I wake up doused in sweat, too terrified to move a muscle. All of this at first wasn't very noticeable. In fact, really I shouldn't even be scared, after all it's just a dream. Nothing can happen to me. To be honest, I wouldn't be scared if the creature hadn't become so close now. I estimate it's only 1 or 2 steps away. For the last week or so I've gotten a clear image of it. It is more terrifying than any word in my vocabulary could accurately describe. Its legs are like that of a deer. Yet them, along with its entire body and head, are colored ash gray. Its body resembles a human. Or rather a human corpse. The skin is pressed tight at the bones and its chest cavity is torn open, revealing a disturbing display of internal organs, blood, and gore, with intestines dangling down to its middle thigh region. It has long, lanky fur-covered arms that end in claws not unlike a bear's. Yet the most terrifying thing about this abomination is its head. It has a long muzzle, the fur of which is scruffy and sticky with blood. It has long antlers on top and piercing, illuminated, white eyes that light up its surroundings. Last night it was what I'd guess is a mere 7 or 8 feet from where I stand. It's getting late now. I need to stop writing and go to bed. I pray with every bit of my soul that I don't find out what happens when the creature reaches me tonight. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/live active 2738. If you hear screaming in the middle of the woods at night, do not investigate. I was always a solitary kid growing up. I grew up on the outskirts of my little town that I grew up in and never really had any friends. I would hang out with someone here and there, but for the most part one stuck to myself, even in high school. Because of my voluntary solitude, I found time to invest in hobbies like fishing, hunting, and playing cards. I used to always love a game of spades with my parents and little brother. Though I loved all the hobbies I partook in, hunting was by far and away my favorite. I would hunt all sorts of critters when it was in season and spent hours just to hunt something. See, the fun part of it wasn't the fact that I just killed something, it was the fact that I had outsmarted the animal and beaten it. I now had a trophy to signify my victory, and I thirsted for this sense of victory. Nothing even came close to the euphoria supplied to my brain when I came home with a fresh kill under my belt. I would sometimes spend days out in the wilderness to hunt, and I'd get lost out there, out in nature, with nothing but the sounds of the other creatures that inhabited the woods in which I was choosing to steal life away from. Due to my love for hunting and fishing, I never found time to do much schoolwork. I passed all my classes with at least a C and graduated high school, but further education was not something destined for me. I was convinced hunting was my calling. After high school, I began to hunt not just for pleasure but for work too. There was a company close by to my hometown that made deer jerky, and was looking for hunters that could deliver them the meat. Of course me, the self-proclaimed lover of such activities, applied for this position and after a week of waiting, got the job. I was to begin as of right then and there. So, I grabbed my gear and went out to the woods and set up shop up in the tree stand I had been using for as long as I can remember and began to wait. I must have sat in that stand for hours, because soon the sun was beginning to set. It was summer though, so I knew I had some time before I was shrouded in darkness. That's when I saw him. A male buck pranced into view all the way on the horizon. I sat there watching it, mesmerized by how it moved. It calmly paced the forest floor, bending over here and there to eat some grass or berries, until finally it came to the creek that I had set my stand up near to. It stood for a moment, looked around, and dropped its head to take a much-needed sip of water. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I raised my rifle, knowing I had only one shot, and aimed it directly behind his front shoulder. I took a deep breath. Bang! My shot was perfect. It traveled directly through the buck's heart and killed him on the spot. My heart swelled as again I knew I won. All this waiting was not in vain. I nearly flew down the steps to my stand and rushed over to the buck. His eyes were still open. I was glad it was instant, so that he wouldn't have to suffer. I picked him up and soon I was back home. I called the company and soon they had someone come over to my house and pick up my latest kill. I thanked the man as he left and shut my door, feeling prouder than ever. I knew that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. A few years passed and I continued doing what I loved, and eventually I received enough money from hunting that I moved away from my hometown and moved to West Virginia, as I heard that the hunting there was great. I wanted to live out in the back country, as I wanted to be able to hunt all the time, and I found a place where I could do just that. There was an old cabin, not too expensive, that sat right in the woods. Not too far away from a town, maybe a 15 or 20-minute drive, so not completely isolated, but the town it's close to is not exactly bustling, so it's not urban either. I liked it very much, and made a couple of friends in town. Most liked hunting, but only one ever wanted to come with me to hunt. His name is Brian. Brian's a good guy and a young one too. He's just about my age, give or take a few years older, but we get along well and we've gone hunting multiple times. The only difference between us is that he's got a full family. Wife, kids, the works. Even has a golden retriever. He's a lucky guy, I'll tell you what. Good shot too. Glad he's my partner. I had set up my tree stand maybe a week after buying the cabin out in the woods, and maybe a month after that is when Brian and I first went hunting together. We sat up in that stand for hours, waiting for something to turn up. Eventually a doe showed up and we did our thing and carried her back to my cabin. At this point, I had learned enough about the making of jerky to know how to do it myself, and with the help of Brian, we skinned the doe and began making jerky and venison steaks. That was a good night. We would go hunting maybe once or twice every 2 weeks, but I would go hunting almost every night. At this point, I had found another company somewhat close by, maybe an hour away, that again needed hunters to gather meat and send it in to them, so once again I applied and got the job. Everything seemed to be going well, I was good at my job and it paid well. Because I was up in that tree stand for so long, almost every night, I knew just about every sound in the woods, from the elk yells, to mountain lion screams, to foxes and coyotes. You give me a noise out in those woods, I could tell you exactly what animal it was and sometimes which gender it was. That's what made this certain night so different. Like usual, I was up in my stand, and I heard a scream. I played it off like it was nothing, because it probably was nothing. Except, this scream was different. It sounded similar to something I've heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Brian was with me and he couldn't figure it out either. Usually we don't really care about these noises as it's not exactly our business to worry about every little sound we hear in the woods at night, however this noise was just wrong. Something was not right with this scream, and after a good 10 minutes of sitting through it and thinking through every animal it could be, Brian and I decided that we would go check it out. After all, we were armed and both good shots, and if it was a mountain lion, we figured it would run away if it heard us coming. We got down from the stand and began our walk towards the direction of the scream. After a minute or two, we could tell we were getting closer because the noise was getting louder. It seemed almost echoing through the trees, and I won't lie when I say it freaked us both out a little. However, we trudged onward and eventually, after another minute of hiking, we stumbled upon a clearing, where we saw what the noise was emanating from. It was a huge elk, standing in the middle of the clearing, just screaming out into the night. We looked at each other, and through the relieved look on Brian's face, I could tell he still shared the same uneasiness that I was feeling. We turned to look at the huge elk, still wailing, and deciding to let it be, walked all the way back to the stand. After some back and forth we decided it would be in our best interests to call it a night and just go home. When we hunted at night, Brian usually stayed in the guest room in my cabin as it was usually late when we got done, 2 or 3 in the morning, and he didn't want to wake his children or wife up coming home. So he crashed at my place. However, even though we were far away now from the elk, it seemed as though it had followed us and was just as loud as ever. This freaked us both out a little bit, but we figured if we went to sleep it would all be over in the morning. So we did. But it wasn't the ending. When we woke up, the scream had disappeared. We were relieved and Brian said his goodbye and left for his home. I did my normal routine, went into town, and waited until dusk before going back out into the woods and into my stand. I was still a tad bit unnerved from last night, but I figured this would help me get my mind off of it, and it did. Until around midnight when I heard a scream again. This time, however, the scream really sounded wrong. Like, really wrong. I could tell this was not the same scream from last night, but it again was not an animal I could put my finger on. I hoped and prayed it would go away, but it didn't. The screaming persisted and persisted until I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what the hell was screaming in the dead of night. I set out in the same direction as last night, expecting for the worst to be awaiting me. I trudged and trudged through the underbrush, until finally I reached the clearing from the night prior, where the scream had reached its peak. What I saw, however, shook me to my core. There was no elk this time, like I had expected. No, there was a figure standing in the middle of the clearing, facing away from me. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. I'll admit it, I was terrified. I had never seen something like this before and I was ready to book it away from there. I didn't want whatever this thing was to see me though, so I backpedaled, as slow as I could, staring at this thing for as long as it was in view. As soon as it was just on the horizon it stopped screaming. Again I froze. Why'd it stop? I wondered. I stood there, in the trees, dumbfounded, staring at this 8-foot-tall creature that had just been wailing in the middle of the woods. I realize now what a fatal mistake I had made by not running home as soon as I saw this thing. As I stood there, this thing turned around, and my body was struck with fear. Though I was at least 300 yards away from this thing, it stared directly at me, and I knew it knew I was there. Its yellow eyes pierced daggers into my heart as it got down on all fours and began wailing once more, starting to gallop towards me. I stood there frozen for another moment before booking it. I knew all the shortcuts to my house and I took them all, knowing I may not have much time left. I sprinted faster than I have ever sprinted, hearing its echoing cries in the distance, its growing intensity only proving I was going too slow. As the sound grew louder than ever I saw my house. I fumbled with my keys to get to the one that opened my front door and as I reached the porch I found it. I unlocked the door and shut it as soon as I reached it. The cries were right outside, and I knew whatever this thing was it was on my porch, searching for a way to get inside. Terrified, I hid in my freezer, where I hoped the smell of meat and ice would help mask my scent to the being. This is where I've been hiding for the last 2 hours. The creature has now found its way inside my house and I can hear it moving around upstairs, tracking any signs of me. I am in the basement and in the cooler, so hopefully it won't find me in here. I tried texting Brian to get over to my place, but my messages haven't been going through, and given it's 3 in the morning I doubt he'd see them anyways. I have no idea if this thing will go away in the morning, but right now it's my only hope that I have. If it doesn't, then it will find me eventually, and who knows what it will do then. If you're seeing this, please, I'm begging you, please heed my advice. If you hear screaming in the middle of the woods at night, do not investigate. 6th story. This story was shared by you/New Year Eyes Throwaway. I will never walk through the woods at night again. I've never really posted here since I haven't had reason to, just lurking and posted a few comments on my main account, but after last night I just have to share my experience of something chasing me in the woods. For starters, as you all know it was New Year's Eve and most people like to have their fair share of drinks at that time. My friend hosted a party that was 2 kilometers, 125 miles, away from my house, if I take the road which is in pitch black for about 1.5 km of the total distance. However, I can also take the other road which would have totaled in about 7 kilometers around a lake, Google Harko Lake Estonia, and it should show up, which goes through the city I live near. The road through there is well lit all the way. As you would imagine, I won't be taking a triple distance at night when I am a bit tipsy, so I split from the party at about 3:10 a.m. and decide to take the short walk through the woods. I was walking through the forest with the only light source being my phone's flashlight and the dots of the city street lights glimmering far over the lake. At one point when starting the hike I opened the camera app in my phone to snap a few photos for fun, uploading them to the Facebook chat between me and a friend, describing my little journey. He was making sure I get home safe. About halfway down the road, farthest point from the houses and lit places around, I hear rustling about maybe 20 to 40 meters away from me. I stop walking to listen. I hear something, some things, coming towards me at a slow pace with the snow crunching under their heavy steps and branches crackling. I call out, "Hey," through the night. The steps stopped, nothing but dead silence for what seemed like forever. I thought I just might be hearing things, taking into account I did have a few beers and 2 or 3 shots of vodka. I take another picture from my phone, uploading it to the Facebook chat, as the flash of the camera lights up a small part of the trees for a split second, and I feel my feet sink into the ground as panic freezes my entire body. I was not alone, and there was something between the trees now 20 to 30 meters away staring back at me. Suddenly the steps start again. I snap out of my fear and book it, hearing the steps behind me grow faster and finally fading behind, running down the road as fast as I have ever ran, not looking back. As I finally see the street lights like the light at the end of the tunnel, I finally reach the lit part of the road. I turn around to look back. Noon, nothing. A few cars drive by as I walk the final few hundred meters, being as alert as I have ever been. I reach my house. I open my front door and lock it. I feel relieved and safe. I walk to my toilet and take the meanest dump ever had. Partially from the consumed alcohol and partially from the fear. I scroll through the photos on my phone that I took when something catches my eye. 2 pairs of eyes looking at me. Cold fear overcomes my body again. Those were probably just some deer or wild boar stumbling around, but that is not what scares me. The feeling of being alone, intoxicated and unaware in the dark at your most vulnerable. You know nothing about what stares back at you from the dark, having vision for only 10 feet around you. 2 pairs of eyes staring back at you from the abyss of the night. 7th story. This story was shared by you/got916. Extremely tall entity in El Dorado County, California. My wife and I were driving down a very windy road at about 10 p.m. after dropping a friend off. It's a very wooded area and properties are spread pretty far apart. This happened during the full moon in early February. It's very dark and secluded up there, but there was moonlight. While approaching the sharpest turn in the road, I began slowing down to approach the almost 180-degree turn in the road. There were no homes nearby here, just a gate entrance to someone's unkempt wooded property. I noticed while talking with my wife something moving across the road up ahead where the turn was to be made. My first thought was it was dust from a car that had made the turn ahead of us, but that made no sense because we were the only ones on the road up and again back down. What I saw was upwards of 20 feet, possibly even 30 feet tall, very skinny, and had kind of a bronze luminescence of its own. I thought it was dust in my headlights ahead, but it formed into a massively tall, slender, almost oval shape as it passed over the road, and as it got to the roadside and entered the tree line heading up the mountainside, I realized a very large skinny leg stepped forth from the shape and stepped into the woods. It almost looked like golden smoke, but with a certain shape and density to it. Needless to say, as soon as I realized I was witnessing something very unnatural, I started to say, "Did you see that?" And my wife cut me off to say, "You saw it too." All of my hairs stood up and I could feel the charge in the air of intense energy even with the windows up and the heater on. I became very afraid and kept driving down the mountain because I knew we had both just witnessed something we probably should have not. I pulled off of the road about a half a mile away to discuss specifically what we had just seen. Our descriptions matched to a T. I had had a very negative paranormal experience as a teenager, so when she enthusiastically demanded we go back I was very hesitant, but finally curiosity got the best of me and we returned to the place we saw this thing. I'm still not sure if what I saw was cryptid or alien or some type of spirit, but I can say it was inhuman and its sheer size made it very frightening. I parked in the road with my headlights shining up the hillside in the direction it was traveling, but nothing was there. We stood in the dark for about 15 minutes with the truck off snapping photos and videos, but captured nothing unusual. I'm very interested to hear what anyone's theory on what this could have possibly been. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.